When we talk about God shocking us, we often imagine it in terms of blessings so overwhelming that they take our breath away. And while that is true, the striking reality is that these divine surprises usually come wrapped in seasons of disappointment. It's in those moments when you feel like everything you hoped for has collapsed, when every door you tried to open has slammed shut, that God is positioning you for something extraordinary. The very place where you feel forgotten is often the place where He is about to reveal Himself in a way you never saw coming. Think about it. The disciples were most shocked when Jesus rose from the dead, but that miracle didn't come on the heels of triumph. It came after the most crushing disappointment of their lives. They had staked everything on Him, only to see Him crucified. Their hopes seemed shattered, their faith shaken, yet it was in that exact moment of despair that God was preparing the most shocking reversal in human history. Resurrection power doesn't come in seasons of certainty, it comes in the ashes of what looked final. Many of us misinterpret the silence of God or the disappointments of life as abandonment. But what if those disappointments are not the end of the story, but the beginning of a divine setup? What if that job rejection was God steering you towards something greater? What if the relationship that ended was His way of clearing space for the one that will truly align with your destiny? What if the closed door you've been grieving over is the very proof that God is positioning you for a door you never even knew existed? We serve a God who specializes in sudden reversals. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned. At each stage, disappointment must have felt suffocating, but in one shocking moment, he went from the prison to the palace. Notice this, it wasn't a gradual climb, it wasn't a predictable promotion, it was a divine shock. One day he was overlooked, the next day he was overseeing the entire land of Egypt. And if you ask Joseph, I believe he would say that every disappointment was the soil that prepared him for the shock of God's elevation. You see, the shock is not just about the blessing itself, it's about the timing. God's timing is never late, but it's rarely early. He waits until the circumstances appear impossible, until human effort has been exhausted, until there is no way to attribute the victory to anyone but Him. That's why it shocks us. If it were predictable, it wouldn't carry the same power. If it were expected, it wouldn't stretch our faith. The shock is designed to remind us that we are dealing with a God who transcends natural laws, human calculations, and earthly expectations. This is why disappointment is often the fertile ground for God's greatest works. Disappointment strips us of illusions, of the belief that we can control outcomes. It humbles us, it quiets us, and it forces us to recognize our dependence on Him. And it is in that place of surrender that God delights to move. The Israelites stood at the Red Sea, with Pharaoh's army pressing behind them, and the waters blocking their path ahead. They must have thought, this is the end. But in the very place where despair reached its peak, God shocked them. He split the waters, making a way where there was no way. And the shock wasn't just deliverance, it was deliverance in a way no one could have imagined. That's what makes God's surprises so powerful. He doesn't just provide answers, He provides them in ways that stretch our imagination. He takes the very thing that looked like the end and transforms it into the beginning of something greater. He turns graves into gardens, mourning into dancing, despair into joy. But the shock doesn't come when you are comfortable, it comes when you are cornered. It comes when you feel like hope has slipped through your fingers. So if you are in a season of disappointment, don't misread it. Don't let the enemy convince you that God has abandoned you. Instead, see it as the staging ground for something greater. You are standing in the very place where He loves to shock His children. The fact that you feel emptied may be proof that He is about to fill you in ways you never imagined. The fact that doors have closed may be evidence that He is about to open a door so great, so divine, that it makes every other rejection make sense. I believe God allows these seasons so that when the shock comes, you'll know it was Him. You won't give credit to the timing of the market, to the generosity of a friend, or to the ingenuity of your own ideas. You'll know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was God, and only God, who made it happen. And when you know that, your faith deepens, your worship intensifies, and your testimony strengthens. So hear me, if you are discouraged today, don't despise that place. If you feel like your efforts have failed, don't curse that season. You may be on the verge of a divine shock. God says, I will shock you soon, but He shocks you at the very point when your strength is gone and your hope is dim, so that when He moves, there will be no question who did it. That's the kind of God He is. He lets you taste the bitterness of disappointment so you can savor the sweetness of His deliverance. He lets you stand at the edge of impossibility so you can witness the miracle of His power. And when He does, you will look back and realize that the disappointment wasn't wasted. It was necessary. It positioned you, it prepared you, and it sharpened your vision to see His hand clearly. So don't run from disappointment. Don't let it harden you or make you bitter. Instead, let it deepen your anticipation, because the very thing that makes you feel forgotten may be the very soil out of which God is preparing to shock you. And when that shock comes, it won't just change your circumstances, it will change you. Closing statement: disappointment is not the end, it is the canvas on which God paints His greatest surprises. And if you can hold on in the dark, you may just wake up to the shock of your life, God doing what only He can do. When God says He will shock you, it is not always in the way you expect. One of the most striking characteristics of His nature is that He rarely does things in ways that align with human logic or the neat timelines we construct for ourselves. Instead, His methods are often unconventional, His timing unpredictable, and His strategies beyond our comprehension. And that's why His movements carry such weight, because they confound the wisdom of man and remind us that His ways are not our ways, His thoughts are not our thoughts. The truth is, if you could predict what God was about to do, it wouldn't shock you. And if you could control how it happened, it wouldn't require faith. God deliberately works in ways that challenge our understanding because He wants us to rely not on sight, but on trust. Remember how He told Abraham he would be the father of many nations. That promise was made when Abraham was childless and well past the age when fatherhood seemed possible. And yet, that's precisely when God chose to speak. Why? Because the shock of the blessing is magnified when it arrives in conditions that make it seem impossible. Think for a moment about how God operates in the Scriptures. When Israel was trapped in Egypt, crying out under the weight of slavery, God didn't send a military uprising. He didn't raise up a powerful army. Instead, He called an insecure shepherd who had fled into the desert. And through Moses, stammering, reluctant, hesitant, He dismantled the world's most powerful empire. That was a shock, and it happened in a way no one would have planned, proving that God's methods are not meant to align with our expectations. They are designed to exceed them. What this teaches us is that God often hides His greatest surprises in places that look weak, unlikely, and even unworthy. He will shock you by using the very thing you discounted, the very person you overlooked, or the very circumstance you thought was working against you. David was the youngest son, the one forgotten in the fields, the one no one even bothered to bring before the prophet when Samuel came looking for a king. And yet, God shocked everyone by saying, "That's the one." He chose the boy others dismissed to bring down Goliath and eventually rule a nation. This is why we must never underestimate the unusual ways God can move. Sometimes the shock doesn't come by God introducing something new into your life, but by Him revealing something in what's already there. You may be sitting on gifts, opportunities, and connections that look ordinary to you, but in the hands of God, they become extraordinary. The 5 loaves and 2 fish didn't look like much in the disciples' hands, but when placed in Jesus' hands, they fed thousands. That was the shock. Multiplication, where there was only lack. Abundance, where there was only scarcity. And this should encourage us, because it means the limits we see are not limitations to God. Where we see impossibility, He sees potential. Where we see weakness, He sees a platform for His strength. Where we see dead ends, He sees doorways to destiny. The reason His shocks carry so much power is because they take what the enemy meant for evil and turn it for good. They take what we thought was loss and transform it into gain. Now here is something worth considering. The shock isn't just in what God does, it's in how He does it. He doesn't just deliver, He delivers in a way that leaves no doubt it was Him. He doesn't just heal, He heals in a way that makes the testimony undeniable. He doesn't just restore, He restores in a way that exceeds what was lost. Job didn't just get his life back, God doubled it. That's the nature of His shock. It's not about returning you to where you were, it's about moving you into something greater than you imagined. But this is where the challenge comes in. Because His methods are unconventional, they require patience, they require trust, and they require letting go of our rigid timelines. Most of us struggle, not with the idea of God's promises, but with the unpredictability of His process. We like clarity, structure, predictability, but God does not bind Himself to our schedules. He shocks us precisely because He moves outside the limits of our control, and that can be uncomfortable. It can test us, but it is also the place where faith is forged. Consider this: if you knew exactly when God would act, and exactly how He would act, there would be no faith required. You would simply wait it out like a scheduled appointment. But because He moves in ways, and at times you cannot predict, you are forced to live in trust. And that trust prepares you to not only receive the shock, but also to steward it well. I believe that many of us are standing on the edge of something we cannot yet see. We've prayed, we've waited, we've wondered, and maybe even grown weary. But the unpredictability of God's methods doesn't mean He is absent. It means He is setting the stage for something greater. When He shocks you, it will not just answer your prayer, it will exceed it. It will silence your doubts, it will silence your enemies, and it will silence the voice in your own head that said it could never happen. And this is why we must remain open. If you hold too tightly to how you think God should move, you may miss the shock of how He actually does. If you're waiting for Him to work through the obvious door, you may overlook the window He's opening. If you're expecting Him to use the qualified, you may miss how He is raising up the overlooked. His methods are unpredictable, but His character is not. He is faithful, He is good, and He always finishes what He starts. So don't be discouraged when His process doesn't make sense. Don't lose heart when the pieces don't seem to fit. He is weaving a story that will not just answer your prayers, but will shock you with the magnitude of His goodness. Closing statement: the shock of God's blessing is not only in what He does, but in the unpredictable, unconventional way He does it, reminding us that He alone writes the story, and that His ending will always be greater than anything we could have planned. When God says He will shock you, it isn't only about answering prayers or shifting circumstances, it's about transformation at the deepest level of your being. Too often, we think of God's surprises in terms of external blessings, a door opening, a relationship mending, a financial breakthrough, a healing. And while those are real and powerful, the most shocking work of God often happens internally. It's when He changes something in you that you didn't even know was broken, or awakens something you didn't realize had been dormant. His greatest surprises are not just what He places in your hands, but what He builds in your heart. Consider how shocking it is when God takes fear and turns it into courage, when He takes bitterness and turns it into forgiveness, when He takes despair and transforms it into hope. These are not small shifts, they are seismic changes in the soul. And when you step back and realize that the person you've become could only have been shaped by the Spirit of God, you begin to see that the most profound shock is not the blessing itself, but the transformation that prepares you to carry it. Think of Saul on the road to Damascus. He wasn't asking to be changed. He wasn't seeking forgiveness. In fact, he was actively persecuting the church, but God shocked him by showing up in a way that blinded his eyes and opened his heart. The real miracle wasn't just that Saul was stopped, it was that Saul became Paul, the apostle who wrote much of the New Testament. That is the kind of shock that redefines a life. It's not just circumstantial, it's transformational, and that's important, because sometimes we're so focused on asking God to change our situation that we overlook His desire to change us in the process. You may be praying for a door to open, but God is more concerned about shaping your character so that when the door does open, you won't sabotage what He gives you. You may be asking for a blessing, but God wants to build the discipline and integrity necessary to sustain that blessing. So while you're waiting on the external shift, He's already shocking you internally by remolding your mind, your desires, and your priorities. This inner transformation is often uncomfortable because it confronts parts of us we'd rather not face. God may shock you by revealing a habit you thought was harmless, but that's actually draining your spirit. He may shock you by showing that the relationship you wanted so badly isn't meant for you. He may even shock you by pulling you out of places you once considered secure, so that you can finally stand on Him alone. These shocks aren't always pleasant at first, but they are necessary, because they uproot the very things that hold you back from receiving His best. And this is where many people stumble. We love the idea of God blessing us, but we struggle when He begins to strip things away. Yet the pruning process is often the prelude to the shock of new growth. A gardener cuts back a tree, not to destroy it, but to make room for a greater harvest. In the same way, God shocks us by removing what is lesser, so He can release what is greater. That relationship that ended, that job that slipped through your fingers, that door that closed, it may have been God's way of positioning you for a future you could not yet see. One of the most profound shocks of God is the way He can use pain to prepare you for purpose. Many of the people in Scripture who walked into destiny first walked through seasons of great difficulty. Joseph was betrayed, enslaved, and imprisoned before he was promoted. Esther was an orphan before she became a queen. Ruth was widowed before she was redeemed. None of them could have seen it at the time, but each loss was a setup for a greater shock of destiny. And when you look back at your own life, you may begin to recognize that some of the most painful chapters were actually the very things that shaped you for where you are today. So when God shocks you, it's not just about giving you something new, it's about making you someone new. He is always more interested in who you are becoming than in what you are receiving. And the true evidence of His hand in your life is not just the blessings you hold, but the person you become in the process of receiving them. The challenge for us then is to remain open to the possibility that God's shocks won't always look like blessings at first. Open to the reality that transformation can feel like loss before it feels like gain. Open to trusting that even when we don't understand the process, we can trust the character of the one who is leading us through it. And here's the truth. When the shock finally manifests, it will not just surprise you, it will silence your doubts. You'll realize that God wasn't punishing you when He closed that door. He was protecting you. He wasn't ignoring you when He delayed that answer. He was preparing you. He wasn't abandoning you when He stripped things away. He was making space for something greater. That realization is often the most shocking of all, that what felt like a setback was actually a setup, and that what looked like loss was actually love in disguise. When you understand this, you stop resenting the process and start trusting it. You stop fighting the pruning and start yielding to it. You stop demanding that God meet your expectations and start marveling at how His plan exceeds them. And it's in that posture of surrender that you are most ready to receive the kind of shock that changes everything. Closing statement: the most powerful shock God can give is not in what He places around you, but in what He transforms within you. Because once He changes you, no circumstance, no enemy, and no obstacle can undo what He has done.